Hey everybody, Lone Wolf here. So before we get into tonight's video, I would like to make a couple of announcements. First things first, I would like to give a big shout out to Jinxed Calavera, who will be reading the lines of Laurel, the main character of the story. She's an amazing horror narrator, and she's also relatively new to the community. So if any of you haven't seen her videos yet, I highly encourage you to check out her channel and show her some love. I also wanted to give a shout out to Duchess of Darkness, Phoenix Fire, Skelevator, and Skybird for also joining me in this video, and I encourage you all to check out their channels as well when the video is over, especially Skybird, who is also very new to the community. Secondly, I would like to make a quick disclaimer, as this story does contain some graphic content and inappropriate language, so if any of you guys have a problem with those things, then viewer discretion is advised. With all that being said, I hope you all enjoy listening to tonight's story. And without any further delays, let's get into it.
As younger siblings tend to do, I absolutely worshipped my brother Calvin. He always seemed like the coolest person in the world to me. No matter what he did, it fascinated me beyond belief. Everybody liked him. He was president of his class, star baseball player, and just had an all-around great personality. All the girls thought he was such a stud, much to my surprise. And although he was older, Calvin wasn't the stereotypical monster. I think that's why we got along so well. For one thing, he never dreamed of hurting me in any way. When I told my psychiatrist this, they couldn't believe it. An older brother that never once tortured his younger sister? There was no way one existed anywhere. But Calvin was different. He would never hurt a fly. His bedroom door was always open whenever I needed to talk. He'd let me lie on his floor and listen to his Led Zeppelin records with him while he did his homework. I felt like the luckiest girl in the world. As the two of us grew up in a small town in the middle of Rhode Island, we only became closer. Maybe it was because of our family situation, but we both needed each other greatly. Our father was an alcoholic. He'd always come home drunk and take out all of his anger on us. Calvin never let him get to me, though. He would let me sleep with him in his bed most nights, so I wouldn't have to hear our parents fighting through the bedroom walls alone. Our mother was a saint. She was one of the only people I could turn to for help. She was the only one besides my brother who understood the pain. Sadly, she died when I was 13. The autopsy showed that Mom had had an overdose on painkillers. They ruled it as accidental, but I was never so sure. After she was gone, our father only got worse. It got so bad that the second he graduated, Calvin moved into an apartment on the other side of town and took me with him. Our father barely protested. I'm pretty sure he never wanted kids in the first place. From then on, it was just Calvin and I, on our own in the big world. He attended the local community college and worked part-time at a grocery store. It wasn't the most glamorous thing, but it helped get food on the table. I was hard to look after. I was deeply disturbed after such a tough childhood. I wasn't good at making friends or being friendly, but my brother never turned his back on me. We were away from our broken home, and we're happy just to have each other. It's at this point in our lives that we made the biggest mistake we ever could. The two of us didn't know it at the time, but to this day, I still regret picking up that phone more than anything. It was the end of summer. Around 1976, the winds were brisk as September was approaching fast. Calvin and I had been on our own for about 2 years. I was 15. He was 19. I remember I was sitting at the kitchen table, finishing my homework. Calvin was working on fixing frozen TV dinners. The phone was in the living room. I jumped up immediately when it started to ring. "Hello?" I asked into the receiver. It was Joey Malone. Joey was my brother's best friend in high school. The two of them were practically joined at the hip until they went their separate ways for college. Joey was in Miami, and I could hear the longing for his friend in his voice. After we caught up for a brief moment, he turned serious.
"Hey, let me talk to your brother real quick,"
Joey said.
"I've got some news that I think he might like."
I rolled my eyes playfully and handed the receiver to Calvin. I could hear my brother laughing from the living room as he caught up with his old friend. They must have been on the phone for a good hour because I had already taken our TV dinners out of the oven and finished mine by the time Calvin walked in.
Hey, sorry about that, Laurel.
He smiled softly, taking a seat across from me.
Man, you'll never believe what Joey's been up to.
I cocked an eyebrow suspiciously. Is he on America's Most Wanted already? I joked.
No, but he might as well be. His neighbors are going to be in Bermuda for Labor Day weekend, and he's throwing a monster party in their house while they're gone. He's invited us to come and crash it. Can you believe it?
He chuckled, taking a bite of frozen chicken. I should have known right then we shouldn't go. It was illegal to break into someone's home, but even more illegal to throw a party in it. I should have known it wasn't a good idea. But I was a naive 15-year-old girl, and all I wanted most in this world was to be a legend, like my big brother was. So, of course, I agreed. Calvin and I planned to drive up to Joey's house. It would take us a day from Rhode Island, but the two of us were so stoked, we didn't even notice. We spent the long car ride blasting the Doors on the radio and singing the lyrics way off key. This was definitely when I felt most content. It was the best time of my life. Little did I know the terror we'd be thrown into later that night. If I had, I would have had Calvin turn the car around and drive off a cliff. We had been in the car for about 13 hours. It was around 9 o'clock at night when we noticed we were in nowhere land. Our map said we were in New Jersey, but it didn't seem like it. "Are you sure we aren't lost?" I asked my brother as I chewed a wad of bubble gum. He kept his eyes firmly on the road ahead of us, nodding his head.
Of course we aren't. Joey told me the directions himself.
I rolled my eyes, blowing a bubble. We must have been driving through nothing but trees for another hour before I declared that we were lost. My brother had the crazy idea that his best friend was some kind of genius. But I knew better. Calvin was getting tired. I was getting restless. I had been sitting in the same position for too long and couldn't feel my legs. "Can we please pull over somewhere?" I whined, my bubblegum slowly losing its taste.
Don't you think I would have about 2 hours ago? There's nowhere to pull over to.
Calvin replied, stifling a cough. It turned into a slight wheeze, which caused my ears to perk up. "Are you okay?" I asked him, concern filling my voice. He nodded, brushing it off like it was just a tickle in his throat. Usually, that would have been enough to disinterest me, but that night I was on full alert. Calvin had really bad asthma. I'd almost lost him many times because of it, which was scary to think about. Almost as scary as the endless road in front of us. It was about 30 minutes later that Calvin began to get frustrated.
Crap.
He grumbled to himself.
That jackass had no idea what he was talking about.
I didn't reply. I knew he wouldn't admit that I was right. I was beginning to feel uncomfortable with our surroundings. It was weird that we had driven 2 hours through nothing but trees, only seeing another car passing every 50 miles or so. I didn't want to admit it, but I was scared. Where were we going to sleep? On the side of the road? Just the thought of that creeped me out. Both of us were hungry. At one point, Calvin had asked me to check the map to see if there were any rest stops or motels anywhere close. There weren't. Not until it was about 10:30, Calvin was practically falling asleep at the wheel when my eyes fell upon a small speck on our ancient-looking map. "Calvin, get up!" I shook him, excitement rising in my voice. "There's a restaurant coming up in about 20 miles. His eyes popped open.
Are you serious?
He asked. Yeah, it's called O'Malley's Family Restaurant. There should be an exit ahead somewhere. I couldn't believe our luck. It didn't strike me as odd that it was the only sign of civilization for hundreds of miles, but I was so hungry, I didn't care. I gave Calvin the directions to the place. There weren't many signs in the pitch-black forest, but I knew that we were getting close. I could feel it. Pretty soon, Calvin turned, and there it was. I can still see the neon sign and bright lights. O'Malley's looked like your typical 1950s styled diner. It was a small building with large glass windows, making it easy to look inside. I could see a few people sitting down. Calvin parked on the dirt road outside. I jumped out anxiously, dying to stretch my legs. It was a lot colder in that area for September. I pulled a sweatshirt over my head as Calvin buttoned up his jacket. I could smell the coffee and homemade pie drifting out through the sliding glass door. Calvin and I walked up side by side. As I looked up at the sign, I noticed there was another part to it that I hadn't seen before. It flickered every now and then in the moonlight. O'Malley's Family Restaurant. Motel on East Side.
I guess you could spend the night there too, if you wanted.
Calvin smirked. We stepped through the door. The floors were checkered, and rows of red vinyl booths were almost all filled. There were a few burly-looking men over at the counter, sipping hot coffee out of mugs. A woman sat with her young daughter, the two of them giggling softly, eating plates of pancakes. A group of teenagers in leather jackets stood over by the jukebox. One of them slipped a dime into it, and some ancient tune by Buddy Holly started to play. An unbelievable feeling of dread immediately fell over me. It came out of nowhere, but it wouldn't go away. I immediately regretted pulling up there. I didn't even hear the woman come up to us.
Can I help you, kids?
Her voice was soft like butter. I glanced up and was met with dark eyes of an elderly woman. She wore a red dress and matching shoes. A dirty apron draped over her front. Her apple doll face smiled down at us, her silver hair gleaming in the lights overhead. I didn't speak. I don't know why, but I couldn't open my mouth.
Yes, ma'am.
Calvin said with a smile.
We'd just like a quick bite to eat before we hit the road again.
He poked me in the back. and I nodded my head feebly in agreement.
Well, come on in. My name is Millie. Millie O'Malley. Welcome to my humble little restaurant.
Her laugh had years of age visible in every syllable, yet it made me uncomfortable.
It's nice to meet you, Millie. I'm Calvin Duncan, and this is my sister, Laurel.
I still didn't feel right as I reluctantly took her hand in mine. I could see a bit of spinach in her teeth, which were obviously dentures. She was somebody's grandmother, but something about her made me uneasy. I guess I got that way around anybody new that I met, but bad vibes were coming off of her.
Laurel. That's such a lovely name.
I managed a weak smile as Millie let out another laugh.
Well, I don't want to keep you kids just standing around. Come on, I'll find you to a booth.
Calvin and Millie were talking up a storm. I hung behind them, pretending not to notice. I learned that Millie and her husband Ted had opened the restaurant a couple years ago after retiring. She was the hostess, and he was the cook. They didn't have any children, which is why Millie enjoyed it so much when younger people stopped in. Calvin was always so polite, he laughed at her jokes and told her our sob story. When she learned that we didn't really have any parents, her expression changed. Almost one of delight.
Oh, you poor things. Well, consider me your mother for the night.
She handed us our menus as I took a seat across from my brother in the booth. Calvin just chuckled and thanked her once more. As she walked away, he opened up the menu with a smile.
Isn't she just the sweetest woman you've ever met?
He beamed, his light brown bangs falling over his eyes. I didn't reply. I slouched down in my seat, not bothering to look at the meal choices. I suddenly wasn't hungry anymore. My eyes wandered elsewhere. I watched as the teenagers by the jukebox drank Coke straight out of the bottle and talked amongst themselves.
What's the matter? Are you feeling okay?
Calvin asked, concern in his voice. I just nodded my head. I didn't answer when he asked me what I wanted to eat. I knew that I was getting on his nerves, but honestly, I couldn't care less. When Millie came over to take our orders, I remained quiet. Calvin ordered us pancakes and hot chocolate with a warm smile. As she walked away, he turned back to me, his expression annoyed.
What's your deal tonight, Laurel? You're acting like a little kid.
He snapped. Don't you feel the least bit uncomfortable around her? I raised an eyebrow. Calvin looked at me confused.
What are you talking about?
Mrs. O'Malley, don't you feel it? She's weird. Something about her doesn't seem right to me. I don't know how he couldn't see it.
She's just being nice. God, stop acting stuck up and try to appreciate what she's doing for us.
Calvin shot back harshly. I rolled my eyes and didn't speak to him for the remainder of our meal. I now wish I would have. I didn't know then that that would be one of the last moments I would ever spend with my brother again. When our food arrived, Calvin thanked Millie for me. I picked at my food and stared down at my shoes. Calvin pretended not to notice. We never fought. We would have squabbles, and this was one of them. Calvin was always so patient with me. He had a good heart and took good care of me. But I wasn't an easy kid to look after. I often wondered if that's why my father got so angry. I was extremely stubborn. I was reluctant to anybody who wasn't Calvin. I had trust issues from growing up in a home where I didn't feel safe. I came off as cold a lot of the time, and my brother was usually the only one who could comfort me. But even he sometimes got fed up. I'm going to the bathroom. I spoke for the first time in half an hour. Calvin just nodded his head. taking a sip of his drink. I slid out of the vinyl booth and made my way to the back. I locked myself in the stall and stood against the wall. I don't know how long I was in there. I just needed to be away from that table. When I returned, however, Calvin was talking to Millie, and who I assumed was her husband Ted. He was a bigger man, with a few gray hairs still clinging to his balding head. His greasy apron hung over khaki pants and a green flannel shirt. They were all laughing about something, Calvin stopping to cough now and again. I walked over to the table as quietly as I could. Calvin looked up at me and smirked.
Well, speak of the devil.
He joked, motioning for me to come sit by him. I sat on his lap like I used to do when I was younger. He must have forgiven me, or at least had been faking it in front of the O'Malleys. I didn't care. I clung to my brother tightly.
I've been wondering what brought you kids all the way up here.
Millie said suddenly, her unsettling smile growing wider.
We don't get many visitors up here.
We're driving up to Florida to visit some old friends.
Calvin replied.
I'm glad that we found this place, though.
Millie glanced at Ted. He blinked, his expression changing to one of pleasure. They stayed silent for a moment, as if contemplating an answer. I clutched Calvin's jeans in my hand.
Yeah, we're a bit in the middle of nowhere, I guess.
Ted chuckled hoarsely. He was missing a few teeth. The remaining ones in his mouth were all yellow. I turned to look out the window. I watched the truck as the three of them continued to talk.
Well, we'd really like to thank you folks for your kind hospitality. How much do I owe you?
Calvin asked, reaching into his pocket for his wallet. Millie shook her head.
No, it's on the house.
When my brother tried to protest, she put a bony finger to his lip. He smiled in gratitude, getting up to leave. I jumped off his lap gently and was about to reach for the door when Ted jumped menacingly in my way.
Hey, what do you kids think you're doing? You can't go driving out now. It's nearly 1 o'clock in the morning.
I wouldn't know. There were no clocks or signs of any time anywhere in the diner. It was like we were in the Twilight Zone. I glanced worriedly at Calvin, trying to signal to him to keep walking.
You two look like you've been driving all day. I don't think it would be wise to be behind the wheel when you're this tired. Come on in the back. We've got a nice little motel where you kids can stay till morning.
I froze. There was no way in hell that I was spending another second with those creeps. That's all right, I tried to object. We'll be fine. But my brother wasn't so sure.
I don't know, Laurel. I'm really tired, and you're still underage. I don't want to put our lives at risk by falling asleep at the wheel.
Calvin said feebly. I shook my head. I grabbed his hand. He was stronger than me, though. I got pulled back onto the checkered floor. Calvin! I tried to object, but he ignored me and walked back to Millie.
I think we'll take a room for tonight.
He smiled, pushing me behind his back. Millie grinned and winked at her husband.
Wonderful. Ted will show you two to the motel across the way. If you'll give me your car keys, I can go fetch your luggage for you.
My mouth was dry. I watched as my brother pulled his keys out of his back pocket and told her where our suitcases were. I couldn't believe it. I grabbed on to the back of Calvin's jacket as I watched Millie walk outside. He just brushed me off. I trailed behind him hopelessly. Ted led us into another building a few feet away from the restaurant. It was smaller than the diner, but only by a little. It was made entirely out of logs, as if Abe Lincoln had built it weeks prior. He and Calvin were chatting away about who knows what. Ted pulled a key out of his pocket and quietly pushed open the door. The inside of the motel was depressing. The walls were completely out of wood, and portraits of mountain landscapes hung on them in rows. An oriental rug lay on the floor, just underneath the front desk. There was a guest book, a cactus in a small pot, and a vintage-looking handbell on top of it. I shuddered. There was a heavy draft in there. It looked as if there had been vacancy for years.
Well, this is the place. I don't think it's necessary to have you two sign the guest book, so I'll just show you up to your room.
Ted smiled, his grotesque teeth gleaming in the light. He led us up a staircase on the right side of the lobby. The hallway was lit by a few mothy overhead lamps. It was long, and just like the rest of the motel, wooden. There was about 5 rooms on each side of us, the doors closed. It was a bit dusty, which started up a quiet round of wheezing for Calvin. I rolled my eyes. He got us into this. I felt no sympathy.
Ah, and here we are.
Ted finally exclaimed. He stood in front of the room and pulled open the door. There were 2 twin beds with quilt blankets and feathered pillows. A large window with a desk underneath faced us. The carpet was a rusty red, the wallpaper slightly peeling at the edges. Some more paintings of mountains and seasides hung around on pathetic-looking nails. I swallowed thickly. Ted reached over me, placing a meaty hand on a light switch above my head. The room didn't look any better as it was flooded with an eerie, orangish light.
It looks very homey. Thanks a lot, Ted.
Calvin smiled. I slowly descended inside and sat on one of the beds, sinking down almost immediately. I could distantly hear Ted telling my brother where the bathroom was, where to go for breakfast, things like that. I watched silently as Millie returned upstairs with our luggage. I must have zoned out for longer than I thought, because when I looked back, the door was closed and Calvin was unpacking our suitcases. We shouldn't be here. I spoke for the first time in what felt like forever. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. Calvin remained silent as he tossed me my pajamas. What are you going to tell Joey? We're supposed to be at his house tonight. I heard my brother let out a loud sigh. It was the kind of sigh that your father might let out at the end of a long day. I knew I was a problem child. I knew that it took a lot of patience to look after me. I was stressful to deal with. If Calvin hadn't rescued me from the wrath of our father, I probably would have turned out way worse. I understood why he was tired. He was tired of me, tired of having to deal with me. Calvin must have sensed my uneasiness. He walked over slowly and took a seat beside me on the bed. I felt his arm wrap around my shoulder and squeeze tightly. We didn't say anything. There was nothing we could say. There was nothing my brother could do to ease my tension. He rested his chin on my shoulder. I could hear his raspy breathing in my ear.
We're going to be okay, Laurel. You need to sleep.
And with that, he kissed my cheek and turned back to his side of the room. We faced opposite directions as we undressed and got into our pajamas. I reluctantly slipped under the moth-eaten blanket and freezing cold sheets. After sitting up in an uncomfortable silence for nearly half an hour, there was no way I was going to sleep. I looked up at the dirty ceiling for what felt like hours, listening to Calvin's breathing. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. I must have dozed off, yet I don't remember it. Calvin is what woke me up. I heard him hastily throw his quilt onto the floor. I heard him rustling through his suitcase. His breathing was labored, as if he had just ran a marathon. I lay up in bed. "Cal, are you okay?" I asked into the darkness. I didn't get a response. The zipper was unzipped, and I heard my brother quietly rustling through his clothes. Eventually, he found what he was looking for and walked towards the door.
I'm fine. I just need some fresh air.
Calvin gasped out, clutching his inhaler in his hand. Light flooded in our room as he stepped out into the hallway quietly. He had these episodes a lot. I always felt so helpless when he did. There was nothing I could do except watch with wide eyes as he struggled to breathe. He sounded so pained. It broke my heart. I wanted to go after him that night, but I didn't. I don't know why, but I wish I would have. Those were the last words I ever heard him speak. He was out there for about 20 minutes before I finally walked out to check on him. It usually took a little while for him to calm down from those little fits. I just wanted to sit next to him and rub his back and tell him I was sorry for being a nuisance. I wanted to do what he had done for me for so many years, care for him. But when I opened the door, Calvin wasn't there. My feet were freezing in the brisk hallway. I rubbed my arms as goosebumps started forming on my pale skin. I reached inside for my sweatshirt and pulled it over my head. Looking around, panic slowly started to rise in my throat. I checked across the hall and the bathroom to see if Calvin was there. He wasn't. There weren't many places he could go. "Calvin?" I called into the hallway. There was no response. I quietly walked back into our room and put on a pair of slippers. I snuck down the hallway and raced down the staircase. He wasn't in the lobby either. I wanted to cry. I choked back a heavy sob and turned back upstairs. There was no worse feeling than being completely alone in a place that you don't know. It's even worse when the only person you want to comfort you isn't there. One of the hallway lamps flickered overhead. I couldn't help the tears that streamed down my face. My mind was racing with possibilities of where my dear brother had gone. In those moments, I regretted ever being mad at him. I wondered if he had stormed off and left because I was just that annoying. I was so caught up in my panic that I didn't even see what I had tripped on. I went flying face first into the oriental carpet. My face burned as I turned my body around to try and ease the pain. My eyes widened in shock. Calvin's inhaler was lying on the ground. It was just outside the door to our room, where I had seen him go out earlier. It was then that I knew something was seriously wrong. Calvin wouldn't leave that lying around by choice. He wouldn't have just dropped it by accident. It suddenly dawned on me that wherever he went unwillingly. I let out a sob. I curled up in the fetal position and called out his name one more time. 1,000 thoughts pounded at the inside of my head. I tried to shake them off, but they wouldn't leave. I reached my shaking arm out and took the inhaler in my hands. I rolled the plastic around in my palm as I stood up, placing it in the pocket of my sweatshirt. I had to find him. We needed to get out of here. I didn't care if he didn't agree. Once I found him, we'd drive away and never come back to this freak show. I dashed back into our room and grabbed the car keys off the bedside table. I didn't bother grabbing anything else. My only focus was getting the hell out of there. I tiptoed down the staircase, the wood creaking underneath my feet. I pushed open the door and ran as fast as I could towards the diner, my only exit to the outside world. The lights were still on inside. Much to my surprise, I tried not to pay attention to the menacing trees leaning over me as I raced to the back door. I was prepared to pound on it until my knuckles were red and bloody, but it opened almost immediately. I quietly slipped inside, looking anxiously for any sign of my brother. I could see Calvin's truck on the other side of the clear glass windows. It looked so close, yet so far away. I don't know how much adrenaline was pumping through my body at that exact moment, but it took every ounce of strength I had not to just bolt then and there. The only thing that stopped me was the sound of a metal object clattering on the tile floor behind me. It echoed loudly into my ears. As far as I could see, there was no one besides me in the building. All of the customers were long gone. I spun around quickly, my neck jerking hard in the process. The doors to the kitchen were closed. When I tried to pry one open, it was locked. I kicked it as hard as I possibly could. My toes were slowly bruising. I screamed out into the emptiness of the diner for somebody, anybody, to come help me. I felt like I had been there for years. A dizzying wave of nausea took over me. I heard that object clatter again, as well as a few barely audible whispers. Someone said,
Crap.
and was quickly shushed. I had to hold my breath just to hear them again. Whatever it was close by. My neck craned, trying to peer into the kitchen once more. The glass windows were hidden behind a black curtain, hung up so I couldn't see inside. That had not been there earlier. I snuck around behind the counter and pressed my ear against the murky walls. There was a sudden silence, and then the shuffling of feet on the tiled floor. I don't know what urged me to do it. It could have been the adrenaline or the hopelessness that had overwhelmingly taken over my body that night. On the counter, there were rows of ketchup bottles and silverware. I grabbed a fork out from under a napkin and clutched it in my sweaty palms. I knew there was somebody or something behind that window. I wasn't alone in there. I jammed the fork into the glass. It didn't do anything at first. Yet after 30 seconds, I had made some progress. The glass started to crack. I kept banging and banging it until it shattered in front of me. A million pieces seemed to fall in slow motion. I didn't step back, though, for as I pulled away the sheet, nothing on earth could have prepared me for what I was about to stumble onto. A stream of smoke poured out through the broken glass. But even through it, I could see that the O'Malley's kitchen was a typical diner kitchen. There were a few stoves and ovens, a refrigerator in the back that held a week's worth of food. But that was not what caught my attention. The overwhelming stench of burning flesh filled my nostrils. I coughed and gagged, struggling hard to get a breath out. My eyes started to tear up. I flailed my arms in an attempt to clear the path, but found myself unsuccessful. The grotesque smell prying into my soul. I wanted to vomit.
Who's there?
I recognized the voice. It was the voice of the man who had taken Calvin and I into our rooms a couple hours before. I didn't make a sound. I still couldn't see, but eventually the smoke cleared through the broken window. My watery eyes soon adjusted to the fluorescent lighting. My mouth fell open in horror. Ted and Millie O'Malley stood in the middle of the kitchen. There was a silver pot about the size of a record player resting on the table in the center. It was the first time that I got a good look around me. Blood was splattered on every inch of the walls surrounding us. It dripped down in streams and formed small puddles on the floor. There was a cleaver clutched in Ted's meaty fist, gleaming menacingly in the light. Millie stood beside him, a wooden spoon at her side. It was wet and covered in what looked like oversized worms. Intestines. I didn't speak. My attention turned to the pot, still boiling and bubbling. I saw my brother's pajamas, strewn in a pile in the corner. I could see clumps of his mousy brown hair sticking to the sides of the pot. My feet stayed frozen in place as the stench of his burning flesh filled my head and every inch of my body. My eyes burned. My mouth was dry. I couldn't even utter a scream. It was then that the O'Malleys realized that they had been found out.
Grab her.
Millie snarled in a cackling voice beyond description. Ted lunged for me, but I was too quick. The fat ass fell on his front, face first in a puddle of Calvin's blood. Millie grabbed the cleaver and threw it at the door just as I pried it open and ran like hell. I ran outside the diner and flung the door open to the truck, jamming the keys inside. I could make out Millie's body racing towards me in the night. But I started up the car faster. It sputtered for a moment and then shot out like a rocket. I had no experience driving, but that was not my top priority. I needed to find help. Tears were streaming down my face, blocking my vision. It was then that the agonizing screams fell. I was having a mental breakdown as I whisked unsteadily through the New Jersey trees. I let out howls of despair. Occasionally, I would spit up whatever food I had left in my stomach. The smell of that flesh wouldn't leave me. I'm sure I nearly drove off the road at least 3 times, but I didn't care. They killed Calvin. They killed my brother and chopped him up and fucking cooked him. I pounded my head on the wheel, the horn blasting into the night. I couldn't feel the blood trickling down the side of my face, sweeping into my hair. My vision was starting to show spots. I don't know how long I had driven until I found the car on the side of the road. There was a man kneeling down to examine one of his tires. I jerked to a stop and flew out of the truck, slamming the door behind me. Vomit clung to the sides of my mouth, dried blood on my face, tears gushing down like a waterfall. He was an older man with a wrinkled face and skunk streaks in his hair. I frightened him, for he stood back in fear. I knew I looked like a mess, a drug addict, whatever. I sounded like one too. You need to help me. They killed my brother. They killed him. They killed him. They chopped him up and they killed him. I remember falling to my knees and howling in pain. The man tried to pry me back up, but I thrashed around in his arms. He groaned loudly as I kicked him right in the gut by accident. I could distantly hear his panicked voice trying to get an answer out of me.
Who?
He yelled through a thick Jersey accent.
Who killed your brother?
I shook my head rapidly, gasping for air. The wind pounded at my ears as I tried to speak. The last things I could make out were his eyes gleaming in the darkness as I wheezed out the name through the pain. I fell hard to the asphalt. They tell me that I was practically frothing at the mouth when they found me. I had blackened out for a moment and the cops assumed that I had died. But I woke up and screamed for hours. I was screaming for Calvin, screaming for somebody to help him, screaming for someone to believe me. Yet, to this day, no one does. O'Malley's family restaurant had been torn down in the late 1950s. Once word got out that the seemingly friendly owners trapped their victims in their motel and ate them, it was barricaded and destroyed. Theodore and Millicent O'Malley were given the death penalty in 1956, 20 years before my brother and I pulled up that summer night. I later learned that they had killed over 20 travelers who crossed their paths, including a gang of motorcycle riders, a group of teenage greasers, and a woman with a young daughter. When the man who found me finally brought me over to the police, I was in hysterics. I was screaming at them that those bastards had killed my brother. I don't know how they couldn't have seen it in my eyes. They saw something. I'm pretty sure they thought that I was on drugs. I was a mess, but I had a good reason to be. I was handcuffed and thrown into the back of a patrol car. They drove me back to the exit where Calvin and I had turned earlier that night. Where the restaurant had stood mere hours earlier was just an empty lot. The sign wasn't there. The building had disappeared. There was no motel, no sign that anybody had been there for years. It was just an empty patch of dirt. No sign of life anywhere. No sign of Calvin. I tried to explain. I cried for what felt like years. I had slept in that bed up in that motel. I sat in the red vinyl booth with my brother, and I talked to the O'Malleys as they served us. I had seen the people at the tables. I had smelled the food, and I had been in there. Yet, no one believed me. Police searched for months on end, but they never did find my brother's body. His final resting place vanished into thin air. They never found any evidence of anything, but I still had Calvin's inhaler in the pocket of my sweatshirt. I can't tell you the number of times I shoved it in those cops' faces, telling them that it was the key to finding out where he was. But I was a lost cause. They even had the audacity of accusing me of murdering him. My case was evidently outruled due to the lack of evidence, but my years of pain never stopped. The judge was convinced I was mental and needed to be locked away, so they threw me in here, which is where I have been since the early autumn of 1976. I'm a prisoner. The only thing keeping me sane is the hope for some kind of justice. I'm a grown woman now, writing this story down as a cry for help. I'm hoping that somebody out there will believe me. Someone knows what I'm talking about. I swear to God that I am not insane. I felt it. I lived it. I survived it. It's not all in my head. Yet, that has been what all of these doctors and psychiatrists have been trying to convince me for years. They said I've imagined it all. All this medication pumping into my body has turned my brain to mush. But I know I didn't. It was too real to have possibly been a dream. I can still smell the flesh, still see the blood on the walls, the menacing faces of the O'Malleys staring down. The only thing I still have to remember by that night is Calvin's inhaler. I hold on to it every day, never letting it go. It's the only thing I have to remind myself that my brother was real. It's the only piece of evidence that I have. It's the only part of him that will never be able to be taken away from me. As younger siblings tend to do, I absolutely worshipped my older brother Calvin. He will always be my big brother. I will always be his little sister. I don't know where he is, which is probably what haunts me most. Any evidence that could have brought his killers to justice just vanished into thin air. I pray to the Lord every day that wherever he is happy, because he is my savior. He rescued me and cared for me and never let anybody do anything to me. Not a day goes by where I don't think about what he would be doing. I'm sure Calvin would have been successful. He would have found a great wife and had a large family. He would have been the best father anyone could have asked for. Growing up was hard. I had never been easy to look after. I had trust issues, social problems, and the only one who knew how to handle me was Calvin. Growing up without him in this prison was the worst thing anyone could possibly imagine. If I had been there for him more, maybe he would still be alive today. I wish I could have been different. I wish I could have acted better and tried to look past everything that I had been through. I wish I had been a better sister. You won't find anything about the O'Malleys or Calvin Duncan anywhere on the internet. It's as if the tragedy was just meant for us. It's as if the whole world wants to forget, leaving it unexplained. Yet, there is a road in the midst of New Jersey. If you turn at just the right spot, you might see the ghostly hue of the diner, filled with life and joy inside. Don't be fooled, for it isn't real. Keep driving and don't look back. But if you do happen to see a boy in the window with mousy brown hair, kind eyes, and a loving smile, you should wave at him, and you should yell out into the night that Laurel loves him and she misses him very much. You should tell him that she's sorry that she couldn't have done more.
What's up, everybody? Lone Wolf here. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to tonight's video. In case anyone is interested, all of the various elements used in this video, including pictures, music, sound effects, and stories, will be linked in the description below. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed the video, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, click the bell for notifications so you don't miss a new video. If anybody has any personal stories or story recommendations for me, or any advice to help improve the channel, there will be links to all of my social media platforms in the description. I'm mostly active on Twitter and on Instagram, but I also have an email, a Discord server, and a TikTok account that you can message me on as well. Until next time, stay spooky. And remember,
The hunt begins when the moon is full.